Welcome to This Week in Wrestling History.
All right, historians, welcome back. Another episode of Wrestling History Podcast. We're your hosts, Ryan, Jacob.
Yo.
So we're going to start a little bit of a mini-series here this week. So what we've got for you for the next 4 weeks for October, because, spooky month.
All the spooky.
We're going to do the best supernatural/horror characters in wrestling history. With the caveat that we're only really going to kind of go back to 1980, 1990. We're not going to go too crazy far back, which honestly I don't think it goes too much further back than that, really.
Yeah, not. I don't think it would go past, and we'll throw out a character that we will talk about. I don't think it goes before Undertaker, really.
Right, so you could make some arguments for some of the stuff Kevin Sullivan was doing, where it was a little bit more almost, what was it? Not Marilyn Manson, Charles Manson-ish, where, yeah, a little bit of evil devil worship type Satanist thing, but the character was still less supernatural, and we're looking more for the little bit more over the top than that, a little less realism, a little bit more suspension of disbelief type stuff. All right, so first things first is we're actually going to try to kind of define what we're talking about as far as like a supernatural/horror threat. So everyone buckle in for a second. I promise this will be short, but we kind of want to lay the groundwork of the foundation of kind of the criteria we're judging on here. So I did a little research into horror fiction, and the first thing I found was a quote from H.P. Lovecraft, the guy that came up with the whole Cthulhu mythos. And he said, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown."
Okay.
So that kind of led us towards thinking, what characters kind of have an unknown element? That's going to be kind of a major qualifier. And we're going to be, over the next 4 weeks, we're going to kind of go through about a dozen different characters, gimmicks, stables, what have you. And we're going to kind of look at them, break them apart a bit, and see if they really kind of qualify. So unknown is going to be one of the factors we're going to look for. Another quote I found was from Elizabeth Barrett. She's an author, and it was, "The best horror intends to rattle our cages and shake us out of our complacency." So again, in a wrestling context, I'm taking this as, how does it differ from your average wrestling character? Does it really kind of escape the kind of wide and zany bounds of wrestling?
Because if you think about those two kind of quotes, technically all of them would be listed as you could make a case for anybody.
Right, exactly.
Big, like Braun Strowman, big scary guy that yells.
Right.
Kind of horror-ish.
Exactly. They're, just by the fact that these guys and ladies are pro wrestlers, that they're bigger and tougher than your normal average human being, the fact that they're going out there hurting themselves, hurting each other, that right there is enough to kind of violate the normal boundaries of our culture and would technically kind of qualify as a horror character. But clearly within the world of wrestling, no, that's just the norm. Like,
right.
Bayley could technically be a horror character by the strictest of definitions because, hey, it's someone that goes out there and is eternally happy, which isn't normal, well, when she's in face mode, with the wacky waving arm inflatable tube men, and she goes out there and fights people. That's not normal.
Right. Or you could even switch it over to, like, Kairi Sane.
Right. Going around dressed as a pirate. Like,
in modern day times.
Right. That easily could technically be a horror character. So we're really going to be focusing on what kind of breaks the bounds of wacky, zany pro wrestling world. All right. And then finally, I found the two elements for a horror villain are, and obviously these are not hard and fast, these are just another author's definitions here. two elements for a horror villain are A, a menace that is threatening, either physically, psychologically, socially, morally, or spiritually. So physically really is going to be something that's not really going to be a qualifier for us because, again, pro wrestling. Unless you're someone like Braun Strowman, Brock, Great Khali sized, you're a big guy. That doesn't make you special in wrestling.
Right.
And then the second one is a menace that's impure. It violates the generally accepted schemes of cultural categorization, which is kind of a weird phrase, but what I took it to mean is something they do exists outside the bounds of what we normally think is acceptable. So again, with wrestling, yeah, they go around beating each other up. They hit each other with chairs. So it's a pretty wide margin, which kind of talks to our point of these really need to be exceedingly out of bounds. So, all right. So those are going to be our loose definitions here. And we're going to start by looking at Papa Shango. Yeah, this is starting real high, aren't we? So I'm going to let you know right now, this week we're actually going to cover Papa Shango, some of the guys from Lucha Underground.
Pretty much the main players of Lucha Underground and the idea of Lucha as a whole.
Okay. And then we're going to close it off with Mankind. So stick with us. The episode will get better after we get through Papa Shango. All right. So Papa Shango as a character debuted in early 1992. Basic gimmick was a voodoo practitioner, face painted like a skull, which was kind of a throwback to the Baron Samedi character. Able to cast spells on opponents, carried various magical items. His items were a fireball shooting skull that also smokes, a fireball shooting stick, which
shoots fireballs.
Yeah, we're kind of limited on early 90s technology here. His spells were to make someone throw up, set his opponent's feet on fire, set his opponent's hands on fire, make a little black goo leak down Mean Gene's arm during an interview.
Great.
Yeah. You'll see why I don't necessarily classify him as the greatest horror villain ever. Two big moments for Papa Shango were a botched run-in at the main event of WrestleMania 8 and then a minor feud with the Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah, he didn't really do much as Papa Shango.
So the character debuted in, like I said, in early 1992. He was gone by late 93.
Yeah.
So lasted, being generous, 2 years.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, during that time frame, they had Papa Shango plus Undertaker show up.
Well, yeah, Undertaker had been around for a couple of years at this point,
right.
Year or two at this point.
So I think they might
double
have
dipping
been,
a little bit.
Yeah, they were trying a little too hard, and they realized that one wasn't working as well.
Right. So right off the bat, part of the problem with Papa Shango was the guy behind the paint didn't believe in the character.
Right.
So Charles Wright, a.k.a. Kama Mustafa, a.k.a. The Godfather, he didn't like this character. He's like, this isn't me. I'm not a dark, brooding, evil guy. I'm a happy, smile. The Godfather is much closer to his personality than Papa Shango is. So it was a little rough there. So going back to kind of the criteria we had set forth that I was looking at was defy cultural norms. The open practices, the open practice of voodoo/black magic definitely kind of goes against social norms. That's not really a cultural value that we have.
Right. I mean, and I would assume we're going to be sticking mostly to the fans in the United States.
Right. Main U.S. is.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there definitely is a cultural element to voodoo, and I'm definitely not going to try to disrespect that or say no one does it. It's just that's not the prevailing norm in our culture. Fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, on that note, he definitely does defy cultural norms and the whole quote-unquote magic thing, which I'm going to get back to that black goo thing. It was really hilarious. Is he a menace? here's where we start to fall apart a bit. The voodoo wasn't above anything more than really basic parlor tricks.
Yeah.
It was nothing that was difficult to explain, and he never really rose above that in the ring. And I think that's a big factor we're going to find for characters that are successful versus characters that aren't, is what happens once you're in the ring. During the course of the match, is there something that differentiates you then? Because if there's not, it's going to be a big uphill battle, and it's bad. So yeah, Papa Shango was a big guy. He's only as menacing to other wrestlers as any other big guy-ish. So I said on that aspect that was a fail, because like we said, you have to really outdo wrestling. Andre the Giant was around before this. Earthquake was around before this. Both bigger guys than...
Right. I would consider them a little more terrifying when they're pulling their heel stuff than Papa Shango.
Right, simply being bigger. So, yeah, Papa Shango's biggest things was against some jobbers, like the lights would go out and suddenly a fire would be in the ring, and the opponent is laying down on the ground and the bottom of his boots are on fire.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that Jake the Snake Roberts is more intimidating than Papa Shango.
Oh, easily would have been. Especially like psychologically.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't a lot of psychological terror here to anyone above the age of 7 or 8, I'd say. Yeah, and like I said, the Mean Gene thing was it was awful. It was back on Superstars, so they used to do these interviews on just like a little raised platform in the crowd kind of thing. Mean Gene's there, Papa Shango comes out, and he just kind of like goes into this weird little trance mode that he used to do. And Mean Gene starts holding his arm, and you see like this, I don't know if it was supposed to be blood, supposed to be mystery fluid or what, but it looked a little bit like motor oil, and it was just like the tiniest little trickle running down his arm. And he was like very confused by it, but Mean Gene wasn't exactly a great actor. His strength was in being kind of the straight man for interviews and not being, oh, Lordy me, what's happening? It wasn't a very psychologically imposing thing, and really that's where a lot of these characters in wrestling are going to need to thrive, is in the psychological realm. Papa Shango wasn't really that. We saw like on one episode of Superstars, he cursed the Ultimate Warrior, who after his match like was standing on the ring apron and then fell to the ringside area clutching his stomach. And then they stretcher him off to the back, and he throws up what looks like kind of Lucky Charms. Like, ooh, you gave someone a tummy ache.
Right. And based off of the character of being like a voodoo priest, they could have done so much more with this if they actually had thought about it. And if, I don't remember his real name.
Charles Wright.
If he had actually believed in doing something like this, like
right,
Mark Calloway believed in the Undertaker character.
And so they never had the Undertaker speak. Similarly, Papa Shango never really spoke. But Undertaker had a mouthpiece in Paul Bearer.
Right. Shango never did, if I remember.
No, he never did. And it made it too cartoony. Like, they overshot whatever they were going, like, whatever the menacing thing would have been. They needed to reel it back, make him a little bit more human, but if he was like, Godfather was never a great interview.
No,
everybody get aboard the Ho train. That's about all he had.
I mean, but then when he was Kama Mustafa,
yeah,
he had other people talking for him.
I think he had Jim Cornette or Ted DiBiase at one. It was Ted DiBiase. He was part of the $1 Million Corporation.
Yeah, he had other people doing his talking for him, which helped out quite a bit.
Exactly. He was good in the ring, better than average. Probably never really got where he could have been given a guy his size and agility.
Yeah,
but yeah, he was always just kind of mid-card level. Never really rose above it. If he had ever gotten on the mic and tried to actually be a little bit more serious instead of cartoony with the gimmick, maybe it would have been a little bit more successful as a horror trope, but yep, this one I'm giving a big old fail.
Cool. All right, so next we're going to hit pretty much the entirety of Lucha Underground.
Ooh, okay.
But I'm going to focus on 3 main characters.
Yeah, because Lucha Underground, it gets expansive.
The easiest way I could describe Lucha Underground is a supernatural soap opera clusterfuck.
Right, but a pretty good one. At least the first 2 seasons. I haven't seen anything from the 3rd season.
I've read a little bit about the 3rd season.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people, namely my sister and brother-in-law, swear by Lucha Underground.
They never did a 4th season, did they?
Or
did they do a 4th and never did a 5th?
I don't know if they actually did the 4th. There was a whole lot of like hoopla.
Yeah, there
towards the
was
end of it.
weird production issues and contract stuff. And
Yeah.
all right, anyways, that's the business side of Lucha Underground. Let's go to the story side.
So mainly what I looked at was season 1, just because that's where everything kind of started and everything began to take form.
Okay.
They had some little things that would show up later on, like in season 3. Now, the reason I say seasons is because they actually had TV seasons for this.
Right, and you can go watch on Netflix seasons 1 through 3, I think. That's, again, why I think there's 3 seasons.
If it's still up on there.
Oh, right. They may have taken it down, but
they actually
Once upon a
had
time was.
seasons for the show
right.
because it was, quote, filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Yeah. I mean, it was.
So, essentially, the story behind Lucha Underground is this Dario Cueto. He essentially started this almost underground blood sport kind of wrestling arena.
Yeah, it almost had like a bit of an 80s movie feel to it as far as I wanted to start my own outlaw wrestling organization that no limits and everything goes.
Yeah, and they had some random one-off rules where there wasn't really any disqualifications or anything like that, or except for like title matches and things like that.
Yeah, the rules were kind of more fluid, kind of like an ECW style where rules only applied when it mattered.
Yeah, kind of think of it like the way AEW is doing it now. It's up to the referee's discretion.
Yeah.
For things to happen. So it started off as just a kind of an underground wrestling thing.
Right, hence Lucha Underground.
But then it started to take a turn where there was unknown benefactors who were helping out Cueto.
Yes.
There was certain characters who had a more supernatural presence.
Right. That's something Lucha did so well. They had like vignettes and they had filmed out of the arena, like backstage segments.
It was essentially meant to be a wrestling TV show.
Right. And that's exactly what it was.
Not in the sense of WWE, AEW Impact. It was more of a TV show that had wrestling involved.
It was more entertainment than so if you look at kind of pro wrestling as quote unquote sports entertainment, you have New Japan on the far side trying to be very much the sport side of things.
WWE, I would say, is more in the middle.
They're leaning more towards the entertainment side of things, but even beyond that,
Lucha's the extreme to the entertainment.
Right. I'm about to say, if you consider WWE to be the midpoint, then on one end of the scale you have New Japan, on the other end you have Lucha Underground.
Yeah. So one of the main kind of quote supernatural characters who was brought up at the beginning of the show was a guy by the name of Mil Muertes.
Big dude wearing a black mask with some flair to it.
Yeah, and the name loosely translated to 1,000 deaths.
Yes.
So throughout the show, they actually talk about he actually, quote, died 1,000 deaths. And because he was a embodiment of or possibly the embodiment of the god of death, which is why he kept coming back.
Gotcha.
So that was another thing that Lucha Underground did quite a bit, was that characters actually died.
Yeah, Lucha Underground killed off 2, maybe 3 characters
in the first season alone.
Right.
There was quite a bit more after that.
Okay.
But they also didn't just rely on the supernatural stuff. But since we're doing the spooky things, that's kind of where
I
we're
mean,
going.
obviously they had luchas and some high-flying stuff and some technical wrestling.
But even character-wise, they had Joey Ryan show up as like an 80s style Miami Vice cop.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. But Mil Muertes was kind of the big bad of season 1.
Yeah, he definitely. I've seen season 1 and I think some of season 2.
And again, he's big dude in the sense of normal wrestling stuff.
Right, and especially on their roster, he was by far one of, if not the biggest guy on the roster.
Yeah. I mean, you had probably a handful of guys like one of them being Big Rick, who was...
I was about to say, he was...
Ezekiel Jackson in WWE.
Yeah, he's probably the only one that I think would have given him a run for his money size-wise.
Yeah. I mean, they had the Mac on there for a while, Willie Mack, who's wrestling in Impact in NWA. He's bigger, but not like intimidating big.
Right. No one that really would tower over this guy.
Right.
Mil Muertes was Ricky Banderas, I want to say.
Correct.
Okay.
So over the course of the show, Mil Muertes would end up dying a couple of deaths, and most of his time was against Phoenix, who's another character I was bringing up because a lot of the season was spent as Phoenix Mil Muertes being the god of death, and Phoenix rising from the ashes, and was quoted as possibly being the god of life.
So it was kind of a cool plan, like an eternal struggle of two forces type thing.
Correct. So the culmination of all of this is Mil Muertes dies another death at the hands of Phoenix. Phoenix wraps him in they have a casket match. Phoenix closes him in it. But turns out that was part of the plan the whole time.
Whoa.
Mil Muertes had a mouthpiece by the name of Katrina.
Yes.
And the entire idea was that she used Phoenix to casket Mil Muertes and kill him because being the god of death.
Oh, turns out he wanted to die so he could come back.
And when he comes back stronger than he was before.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Sucker.
So starting off with those two, and again, this is quite a bit different from the normal wrestling tropes that we have.
Yes. Quite a bit, I would say.
To me, I think all of this fits into the classic horror theme for Mil Muertes, at least. Being the embodiment of a god, namely the god of death.
Yeah, that's definitely outside even our normal wacky zany race car driver
right
wrestling gimmicks.
I don't think I even have to explain as to why it's outside of it.
Right.
Just by stating what he was in the show, I think it kind of hits it.
Right, exactly.
And again, Phoenix, not as much of a horror character, but still kind of pushes the boundaries.
Definitely fits into the supernatural element that was originally kind of our goal too, was supernatural more than horror. It kind of shifted to horror because
October. Yeah, boom.
And that's typically how the supernatural is presented in wrestling, because it's a competition, so one's going to use horror as an advantage, and using supernatural as an advantage is pretty much going to be horror.
Right. Most of the horror characters end up being the heels.
Right. There's very, very few heroic supernatural characters, because the heroes are the ones we can identify with, the ones we can get behind, the one we can understand.
We can't really get behind somebody if he's got crazy powers.
Right. You know, even though everyone kind of cheers for the villain in slasher films, it's not because you actually identify with... You don't identify with Jason or Freddy Krueger. It's just that, yeah, get those kids. This is going to be fun and silly.
Right.
But it's not because you're actually sympathetic to the villain. Whereas in wrestling, it's much more about making that connection and with the characters, and yeah. So
one of the other characters I wanted to hit on in Lucha Underground was he now goes by Jeff Cobb.
Wow. Okay. I did not know he was in Lucha.
Yeah. Matanza?
That sounds right.
I think that's how you pronounce it. Cuerto. So he was Dario's, quote, brother. That at the beginning of the show, they quoted that Dario had an ace in the hole, a monster that he had hidden somewhere.
Jeff Cobb's not a bad ace in the hole.
Right. So think of essentially Abyss from Impact Wrestling, which we'll hit on at some point during our mini-series.
You'll be getting one in the coming weeks here.
Big, thick mask on and kind of a insane asylum style, almost like a Michael Myers
like in
suit
a,
on.
Okay, yeah.
And Dario just kept this guy hidden away. We saw flashes of him every now and then in like hidden in some building, stuck in a cage kind of thing.
Okay.
Because from what the story was is that their mother was very abusive and wasn't always the best person to them. And Matanza ended up killing her.
Which... Oh, yeah, okay, Matanza and Dario, you said.
Yeah. So Dario kept Matanza around just as, again, his ace in the hole in case he ever needed something out of the Lucha Underground.
Yeah, kind of the muscle to back up his brains.
Right. So as we're getting glimpses of Matanza being in this cage and locked away, there's points where he gets fed, but he's getting fed people who have wronged Dario.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay, so a little Hannibal Lecter-ish kind of thing, or...
Kind of, but not as smart.
Right.
More of a just... I'm trying to think of something to fit it, like...
Right, just kind of like a monster being kept tied up in the basement type thing.
And gets fed every now and then.
Interesting.
And I'm vaguely certain, and again, I only did most of my research off of season 1. I think at one point in season 2 or 3, he gets fed one of the actual, like, characters, and he eats his face.
Ew.
Yeah.
Did he come back as a luchador under a mask?
I believe so.
Lucha Underground, there's... as much cool stuff as they did, there was also some, all right.
That makes...
That, okay.
Yeah, we're here.
We're just going to get rid of that character. And, like, they really didn't... They only had, like, their kind of central cast. They really didn't fire guys and bring in new ones terribly often. It was just that, okay, we're just going to give you a new character here. Put on these clothes instead.
They just rotated through everybody pretty much. But over the course of time, again, we're just getting flashes of this character until all of a sudden we're in the middle of the big tournament that they have, or the big battle royale, where it's the Aztec Warfare.
Oh, yes.
So it was essentially a Royal Rumble style thing, but the title was always on the line in these.
Gotcha.
So there's only supposed to be 20 entrants, but then all of a sudden Dario comes out.
We have a mysterious 21st.
Yes. And it ends up being Matanza. And Matanza just goes through and decimates everybody. Now, one of the big things that they had with him was because of his violent nature, he had some kind of connection to the Aztec god of violence.
God of violence is a really specific one, but okay.
Right. So, again, having this whole thing happen where he's this being who shows up when he's needed, does the muscle kind of thing, but always takes it just a little bit too far.
Mm-hmm.
Gets fed people.
Yeah.
And, again, gets referenced as the god of violence quite a bit.
That's up there.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where it'd be hard pressed to not make the case for him to be a supernatural villain.
Yeah, and the cool thing about Lucha Underground was no matter how far into the fantasy realm they drifted, they still treated it pretty seriously. which it honestly, it goes a long way with how you're going to come out and say, I'm the god of death, and expect to be like, most places that's not going to fly. That's going to be like, okay. But if everyone else around that character is treating that like it's the gospel truth, it helps.
Yeah.
So the context for these things really, really matters, and it really helps, or in some cases breaks everything else.
Yeah, and so here's a list of just random one-off things that happened over the course of Matanza's run in Lucha Underground.
All right.
So there was something that they had called the, I believe it was the Gauntlet of the Gods, which think Infinity Gauntlet, but minus the stones.
All right.
Somebody ripped out Matanza's heart with it.
Oh.
But he kept going.
Oh.
Because
that's a pretty good... I'll give you that on the supernatural chart of... That's definitely on the plus column.
And the reason he kept going is because their father, Dario and Matanza's father, ended up summoning a dark Aztec god into Matanza's body, a.k.a. the god of violence.
Oh, all right then.
What was the other ones? Oh, sorry. Not god of violence. God of slaughter.
Again, that's really weirdly specific for your deities, but
right.
You do you.
So, and because of that, Matanza roughly translates into slaughter, carnage, or killing.
Who names their kid that?
Right. So, again, he killed their abusive mother.
I mean, maybe the mom was onto something.
She probably could have been. He gets...
Not that I'm advocating child abuse.
Right. So the person he ended up eating his face, the name was Bael, Bael,
which already is a demon name.
Correct.
All right.
Bael got murdered, and they ended up feeding him to Matanza, which is where the face eating part came into.
All right.
He ended up getting murdered by like the Order, which is like a bunch of
lackeys.
Yeah, kind of. But
cultist kind of lackeys.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right.
And I'm thinking that's pretty much all of the craziness.
That's pretty high up there. So,
and again, going back to kind of the wrestling stuff, it's Jeff Cobb. So
big dude.
He's got this. The way that they describe him is built like a row of brick shit houses. Check.
Yep.
Throws people like they weigh nothing.
Check.
Can pull off a standing shooting star press.
For a guy his size, it's pretty damn impressive. So, yeah, he definitely goes kind of above and beyond the normal wrestler thing. And I'm guessing he did something to kind of incorporate the whole God aspect into his in-ring stuff. Like, a little bit of no selling and a little bit just
he had the
relentlessness.
He had the no selling thing. He had where it was anytime he would face somebody, it was almost all offense.
Almost almost a squash type thing.
Right.
So just
but
the unstoppable force.
And the matches always lasted a little bit longer than just a flat out squash because he wanted to hurt the person.
Yeah, he was out there to hurt someone and make a point, not just win a match.
And they always referenced when he would do the high flying things like a tope or the standing shooting star press, it was because of the ability of the god that allowed such a big man to do this.
I actually really like that reasoning behind a big guy being so agile.
Right.
Like that actually really I like that blending of the mythos with the ability. Like that's really where it helps.
And we've seen Jeff Cobb do this, and it doesn't make sense when he can do something like that.
Right.
But when they have a reasoning behind it, like, oh, the reason he can do it is because he's got a god sitting inside of him.
Yeah.
It makes more sense.
I like that a lot. I mean, cool, taking absolutely nothing away from obviously just being a crazy good athlete.
Right.
But I do like that playing in that context again.
Doing the whole storyline thing behind it.
Exactly. Context that makes so much difference for everything.
He on top of doing the no selling and things like that, he would pull off moves like we've seen where Brock would put the Kimura on, he would snap the arm.
Yep.
or Shayna would stomp the arm.
Oh, yeah, the breaking people's arms and joints.
Yeah, he would do things similar to that, and he would also be able to throw people around. We mentioned that.
Yep.
He would pick up guys. At one point, Rey Mysterio was in this, and him and Mysterio had a feud.
I forgot that was during his time away from WWE.
Yep.
Yep.
Mysterio and Matanza had a feud because Matanza blamed Mysterio for the death of his brother. Dario ends up dying at one point.
Okay.
And an amulet comes into play where the amulet brings Dario back to life.
Oh, well, that's convenient.
Right. So he blames Mysterio for Dario dying. And, I mean, it's not like it's hard to throw Rey Mysterio around.
I mean, I've seen the guy get thrown into the side of a production trailer, and it's still possibly one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
I mean, going back to last week's Raw when you're watching Brock literally toss Rey around like he's a lawn dart.
Yeah.
They again made the reasoning behind him being able to throw around a fully grown man as he's got the power of a god.
Yeah. Awesome.
So, to me, I would think almost all of Lucha Ground hits this. Except,
Lucha Underground?
What did I say?
Lucha Ground?
Yeah, Lucha Underground, Lucha Ground.
Missed an under there.
Whatever. It just makes more sense to me that the entire thing is a supernatural TV show entity kind of thing.
Right. And again, the context of them actually in story, everyone taking it very, very seriously goes so far. In the whole presentation backing it up because, okay, everyone took Papa Shango, quote unquote, seriously, but did we?
Right.
No. Like,
it's a little bit easier to take some of these guys more seriously.
Right. Papa Shango was pushed too far out of the context, whereas with Lucha Underground, all of the context was pushed so far that still everything made sense in that context.
Right. It's one of those where, well, if we're going to turn it up to 11, we might as well make 11 make sense.
Exactly. It's like the lowest we're going to go now is an 8 then, because if we get too far outside of that realm, it starts being loose threads.
It throws everything off.
Right.
If
everything's
back off
not
on it.
within the same ballpark, then it's too easy to see through it all. So,
yeah.
All right.
I think
next.
I think that may be something that we should go back and watch.
Some Lucha Underground?
Yeah.
I'm down for that.
I think it would be.
If it's still on Netflix, I'm down for that.
I'll find where we can watch it.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So, last one up for today, Mankind. As we know, Mick Foley. Character debuted in the ring. It was April 1st, I believe, if not April 4th of 1996. I'm going to say the character ended in July of 1997, so just over a year run. Mankind was obviously around much longer. Obviously, we had King of the Ring in 98, where we went flying off the Hell in a Cell. He was Mankind. But July to September of 97 was when we started seeing Dude Love show up, had Cactus Jack show up. We were well into the Three Faces of Foley by then, and I consider the original Mankind character to have been kind of done by then. So
makes sense.
All right, so our basic gimmick was a masked, quote unquote, deranged and disfigured antisocial recluse.
Okay.
Well, notable traits were he had that like weird leather mask, a quote unquote missing finger. In actuality, it was just a glove on his right hand that bound his middle and ring fingers together, so it looked like he was missing a finger. And he would pull out his own hair,
which always kind of weirded me out a little bit.
Yeah,
because it wasn't gimmick hair.
So what I believe it was is I think he just shaved spots on his head, which that alone is some devotion to a gimmick.
Right.
And then just took that hair that he shaved and put it into the strap on the masks so it would stay in place, and then just pulled that out. So because he pulled out big clumps, and I can't imagine he was actually just ripping big clumps out on a nightly basis. So big moments for Mankind in his original. So we're not ever going to get to the Hell in a Cell match. This is all well before that. Because, like I said, the character evolved at some point.
I'm assuming this is still around pre-Boiler Room Brawl.
Well, Boiler Room Brawl is his big moment. So
Okay.
that was the first one, the Boiler Room Brawl, and then the Buried Alive match versus The Undertaker, aligning with Paul Bearer, and then kind of the end of the character really was the interview with JR, which we're going to get to.
I know we've talked about it before, but it's probably one of the best interview segments I think I've ever seen.
I watched it this week twice, and both times I was getting chills in places, and just each time I was appreciating different parts of his delivery, of just everything Mick Foley was doing in that interview was fantastic. And I honestly don't know if he could even do it again today. He's just so different at this point. Much like I don't think I could dredge up some of the emotional stuff I was going through in my 20s much later in my life now. But
Right.
So, defying cultural norms. Well, he appears to overly dwell on negative emotions, only acknowledging suffering and misery, enjoying inflicting pain on others and himself. Definitely, I mean, yeah, wrestlers I'm beating up the other guy. There's a difference between I'm doing this because it's my job and I'm doing this because I enjoy it. Whereas Mankind, it wasn't just his job. It was a form of catharsis for him. Like, that was what made him actually feel better about his life.
Was inflicting the pain on everybody else.
Was taking what was inside him and physically manifesting it on someone else. That's a level that characters don't really get to. Like, you can have kind of a sadistic character that, quote unquote, enjoys hurting other people, but it's still yet a different level to be like, I hurt inside, so I'm going to make you hurt because of that.
Interesting.
It's that weird acknowledgement of what's inside and bringing it out that really kind of puts Mankind over the top for me. I'll confess, he doesn't quite hit the supernatural level on things, but boy, do we get a horror character out of this.
Yeah, I would think that Mankind is more sitting in the realm of, like, Halloween 1 Michael Myers.
Yeah, it's that's going back when we're talking about the physical, psychological, social, and those kind of horrors. This is such a psychological and social horror because it takes everything that we're basically taught culturally to, you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you got to look for the good in life, you got to persevere.
Whereas we have Mankind who's like, life is fleeting.
Like, no, this is ugly. I'm going to stay down in this mess, and I'm not going to pull myself up.
I'm going to pull the rest of you to me.
Exactly. It's like, I'm going to drag you all down in this because you put me here, so you're coming down with me. So, is he a menace? And I said, possibly more so than anyone else will cover on both a mental and physical level. And as we talked about it last week, the mental aspect of Mankind is a sinister realization that the potential monster in him is within everyone.
Yeah.
It's a brutal reflection of, I could be a step away from that. And it's that if not for one bad decision or outcome in life, we could all be that scared, scarred, abused, and tortured from within person. And I said, physically, the light self-harm, but he also had that animalistic squealing when he was putting on the mandible claw, and the relentless self-sacrificing offense. Like, yeah, it was kind of the standard Cactus Jack offense, but he was just throwing himself at the opponent, and he was going all out. I don't care what happens to me as long as you're taken out.
As long as it gets done.
As long as you hurt as much as I hurt, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
So, the Mankind character, again, just that brutal psychological level of that character, having looked back on it a lot more recently, such an amazing character. I don't think
Foley doesn't get the credit that he deserves with the stuff that he was doing.
Like people do credit him as being an amazing promo. Everyone needs to go watch that interview with JR again, and just it's a 4-part interview that they had played on Raw over the course of 4 weeks. For me, it was the third part where they actually acknowledged he was Cactus Jack, and there's 2 lines that really got me. Is he was talking about how, so this was actually in the second and third parts, but he was talking about when he was talking to Shawn Michaels, and he's like, yeah, growing up, I always saw myself as you. It's like, oh, what, the champ? And he's like, no, the heartthrob. And then talking about Cactus Jack, where he's saying, Cactus Jack was just supposed to get my feet wet, learn what I'm doing, and get into the business, and then I'd get the girls, I'd get the tattoos, I'd get the earrings. And he says, Cactus Jack was supposed to be here for 3 months. He ended up staying for 11 years.
Yeah.
And then the one that really gets me every time is when he's talking like, when I put on the mandible claw, I'm thinking it's Vince McMahon. And I'm thinking, why didn't you take me when I was young? Why didn't you take me when I was good? And the emotion and the way his voice is just cracking during it. It's, well, as they say, the best characters are just that person blown up.
Right.
And you could tell this was Mick Foley really feeling this way about the whole thing. And, like, yes, obviously he's not really Mankind, but the pain he was pulling from for the Mankind character was so real.
Yeah.
And that's not the only interview as Mankind that was so great like that. There was other interviews where he was in the ring when he was feuding with Undertaker and just talking about how ugly everything is and how ugly people are to him. And he acknowledges at various points that he has a wife and kids, but still, like, how awful the world and everything is.
Yeah.
And it's just, man.
Like I said, Foley, I don't think gets the credit that he deserves. I wouldn't say he's the best worker. He's above average.
Right, like he doesn't have the physique, and he never really put in the work on his physique.
But
so
he could tell a story probably better than anybody else in the ring.
Right.
And being able to tie that in with his promos and his backstage interviews and things like that. I would say Mankind as a whole might have been one of the most holistic, well thought out characters that have ever come across WWE.
Yeah.
I would say as of right now, next to The Fiend.
Right. So, spoilers, The Fiend is on the list, and he's actually kind of the reason we have a list.
Right.
So we came up with this idea shortly after The Fiend's debut. And The Fiend is going to be we'll definitely get to him, but
that'll probably just be one episode.
It'll probably be our final episode. I'm thinking the last episode of this whole series is going to be The Undertaker, The Fiend, and something else. But
you mean the good ones?
Yes, exactly. The pinnacle of this whole thing. But yeah, it's just, I think you're right when you say Mankind as a whole, as a developed character, is just more complete than we ever get to see, because we never get to see that real psychological level to most characters because they're so distanced from the performer. Even if it's an aspect of their personality blown up, we rarely get to see the deep, dark parts that really drive the character.
Yeah, like Stone Cold Steve Austin, for instance.
Yeah.
Great character, but he's a guy that likes to beat people up.
Right. There's an underlying motivation that largely goes unsaid in wrestling of why do you want the belt?
Right.
Most times it's I want to be famous, I want a lot of money. I want to be quote unquote the best.
In some cases, like Stone Cold, you get the I want to make sure that I make Vince's life hell.
Right, which helps. Mankind, most guys are never going to be the champ, but the underlying thread is that, hey, I'm at least trying to get to that level because such and such a reason.
All right, and that's where we're going to end it. We had some technical issues where the recording didn't take all of our final thoughts on what we talked about for most of this episode with Papa Shango, Mankind, and Lucha Underground. It also didn't take anything that we talked about AEW and NXT, Monday Night Raw, and SmackDown from this last week, which was the pretty big deals of the week. But next week, we're going to have a little bit more going on. We're going to do more of this Halloween supernatural character thing. And maybe we'll even talk about the debacle that was Hell in a Cell as of last Sunday when you're listening to this. So thanks for hanging in there, and we're history.